Jake, can you give some assistance to Anita? She's having
Oh,
sound.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that might be why you weren't, or just not making sound.
That could have been.
I think that was it. There hasn't been sound in this room in a minute.
Thanks, Jake.
Hello? Check, check. Jake, can you move Takara Nicole Thomas into the panelists, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem. Let me know if there's anyone else.
Hopefully I didn't miss anyone else.
Okay, we are now live.
Johanna, is Live Manager resumed?
Yes, it's ready to go.
Okay. And we have Supervisor Pyska. We have Supervisor Scott here with us.
Yes, she's here.
Okay.
We need boardroom video as well.
There we are. All right, everything's ready to go. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back, 3:03 p.m. We're going to hit up our last agenda item, item 6.10, our 3 p.m. item. Discussion and consideration of zoning ordinance amendment to Article 21-27 regarding the transition of applications impacted by the Farmland Protection Zone. And this is sponsored by Community Development. And we have Deputy Director Takara Nicole Thomas with us.
Hello, yes. Would you like me to go ahead and give a walkthrough of the agenda item, or would you like to manage that, Chair Sabatier?
It's really up to you. Since this is coming from the decisions made over at the Planning Commission, I wanted to make sure that nothing was missed as far as what was discussed.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and launch into it. So on March 25th, the Planning Commission heard the rest of the proposed zoning amendments for Article 27 relating to Farmland Protection Zone and farmland designation. If you all recall, ordinance number 3101 was heard and approved by you all as the Board of Supervisors on December 15th and became effective January 13th. This had the unintended consequence of impacting a large number of permit applications that were already in the queue. So the Planning Commission heard language to expand to expand some protections for some of those permit applications that were already in the queue, namely providing a 3-year transition plan to meet the new compliance requirements of the Farmland Protection Zone if a permit application is for a project that is located within the Farmland Protection Zone. And that language for the 3-year transition was only going to be for applicants that are deemed complete as of December 15th, 2020, and if those permittees had already undergone and completed the CEQA process. Ultimately, the Planning Commission delivered a recommendation in writing to the Board of Supervisors stating that commercial cannabis cultivation permit applications for projects located within the Farmland Protection Zone, which were deemed complete but have not received a use permit before or on December 15, 2020, be excluded from the provisions of the Farmland Protection Zones for up to 3 years. The Planning Commission also continued their discussion and also recommended to the board in writing that that actual language be expanded to include all permittees, regardless of if they're in the Farmland Protection Zone or if they are in a farmland designation. Farmland designation, just to refresh your memory, is unique farmland, prime farmland, state importance, local importance, etc. So that language that the Planning Commission also recommended is that applications that were not deemed complete before December 15, 2020, as well as applications for projects located on parcels with farmland importance designation. As of March 25th, 2021, approximately 25 applications within CDD are located within the Farmland Protection Zone, with approximately 5 that are deemed complete based on the proposed language. The Planning Commission also continued on to recommend that the Board of Supervisors adopt language that provides guidance for applications that were not deemed complete by December 15th, meaning that these projects would have to update the application project description to meet the ordinance before the permit could continue moving through the permit process. So ultimately, the Planning Commission considered that language and submitted in writing to the Board of Supervisors. Their recommended language is to adopt the, as we've been calling it informally, the grandfather language for projects that are located both within the farmland protection zone and farmland designation. But ultimately, that decision is going to lie with the Board of Supervisors, which is you all.
Thank you very much. So just to follow up on that, there's, as was mentioned, there's 25 applications that are within that protection zone that we finalized on December 15th. If you remember, originally the language for farmland designation was if you are within an isolated area or not part of a larger network, but you found yourself in prime farmland, unique farmland, or farmland of importance for local and statewide, that as long as you were isolated and not part of a larger network, you can cultivate outdoors. There was a lot of confusion for that. There was the interpretation of what isolated and larger network was being interpreted in different ways, either by the applicants, by staff. I'm not quite sure where it fell, but we were seeing the full spectrum, where some that were absolutely not isolated and part of a larger network were going through the process of getting their use permit. On the other side, those that were absolutely isolated and not part of a larger network were told that they weren't going to be able to cultivate outdoors. And so there was a conversation that was had between now Planning Commissioner Lance Williams, Brenna Sullivan from the Farm Bureau, the Ag Commissioner Steve Hadjic, and Director of Community Development Scott DeLeon, to create the Farmland Protection Zone, which was basically just drawing lines on a map to help make sure that there was no more confusion about what isolated and larger network meant. Unfortunately, because we have so many applications that are in the process of getting to their use permit, some people are trapped in the middle of this a change in the ordinance. I still feel wholeheartedly that we made the right changes in order to ensure protection of our century-long of agricultural use in those areas, and that we want to make sure that there's longevity in those industries. But at the same time, we need to, I feel we need to be fair, and I appreciate the Planning Commission bringing this back to us with what I think is a fair opportunity to look at it as far as how can we help those that are caught in our web that we just created. As was discussed, right now it says 3 years transition. As long as these items are met, that the application has been deemed complete, December 15, 2020, and CEQA has been reviewed and completed its process. I agree with the concept, but I think that I would like to offer some potential changes in the idea of what does this look like, this transition. So I met with the Ag Commissioner and the Farm Bureau. I believe, and they'll correct me, I'm sure, if I say this incorrectly, I believe that during the Planning Commission, they spoke up that they were not in favor of this transition period. And so I met with them, and this is partially what came out of that conversation. And here is what I would like to offer to the board. Instead of 3 years, we offer 2 years. And if approved, let's just say if it's approved by April 13th, then they would have until April 13th, 2022 to meet the new compliance requirements of the Farmland Protection Zone. You can be provided those 2 years if you meet these certain things. And so one, applications have been deemed complete as per California Government Code, and this is not including CEQA, this is just your application. I was reviewing through the Streamlining Act that if you have 30 days, we can say it's not complete. If we don't say anything, it's complete, or if we say it's complete, then that would be one. And again, as of December 15th, 2020, because that's when we made that rule, and so anybody that was in that process to get to there, that's the way that I would see that as is demonstrated in what's offered to us originally. Number two, we talked about this with the Ag Commissioner and the Farm Bureau, and I agree with them wholeheartedly too. it makes no sense to say, let's give you a use permit that only lasts 2 years, and then we need to give you a use permit that's in compliance, because that would be like a non-conforming use permit. And so saying that early activation would be available for those 2 years, for those that meet this criteria, may be approved, because early activation has very specific guidelines of what you need to do in order to be approved for early activation. If the applicants meet the requirement of the portion of the chapter of Chapter 21, Article 27, about the early activation. And all applicable taxes are paid in full. The applicant has not been in violation of any applicable state or local laws regarding the use permit, and the applicant has made reasonable efforts in the use permit process to provide all necessary information and documentation. And maybe that wording needs to be tweaked, but the idea is, if you have an abandoned application, I don't believe that this should allow you, because you had a complete application and then 6 months of no activity of providing us any information or anything that we've requested. I want to make sure that we don't allow those applications to tag along. There has to be reasonable effort made by the applicant to make it still an active process. And then number 3, if you are early activated, if the applicant has already had a previous early activation permit, that we would follow the resolution that we just approved earlier, meaning that you could only do what you've already been approved to do as far as square footage, footprint, and so on. That way it's an easy renewal if you meet all the guidelines. And number 2, if the applicant, and this is to speak of the 5, I believe it would be speaking of the 5. If the applicant has completed their CEQA process and has been deemed complete, again, per the California Government Code, they shall be permitted to early activate up to the maximum allowable square footage from their use permit. Now, I will just put a caveat in there that was not necessarily the conversation right here for this specific part that I had with the Farm Bureau and the Ag Commissioner. They're very reluctant to want to allow a large grow, and I'm not aware of the size of these potential grows in the areas. And so this possibly will be debated as far as what is the maximum allowable that we can do in a place that we're looking to protect. So basically the concept is that within 2 years, there would be a full-on protection. People will be mixed light or indoors by that point in time. It is of my opinion that 2 years is a doable amount to get your use permit, looking at the timelines that we have currently and looking at some of the action that's been taken to help those timelines be more efficient. I also believe that having an application deemed complete is far enough along in the process that I would like to offer some sort of fair avenue to be able to move forward. And there is a caveat, and I will say that Deputy Director Thomas made a really good point, a very valid point, that if somebody has not started CEQA, why would they move forward to want to do outdoor when their CEQA is not going to be for outdoor? Their CEQA is going to be for a mixed light, which is a different analysis altogether. And so at this point, they would just be doing 2 years of outdoor, and then they would be stuck, have a hole, a gap, where they wouldn't be able to do anything until they finalize an update to meet the compliance. And at this moment in time, I think that it's a choice that I'm willing to allow for the fact that there is a sunset. It will always be done no matter what 2 years from now. And that if you were an applicant in a situation where your CEQA hasn't been started, the most common sense approach is to start your CEQA with the actual use permit that you are aiming to get, which would be in compliance with the new law. I've said a lot as far as the changes that I would like to see. I'm open for conversation. I recognize that if that is something that we wish to change and add to, that this would recreate and reinitiate a first reading, possibly next week. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we do this right and treat the applicants fairly for the fact that there was a lot of confusion as far as who can do what where when it came to prime farmland, unique farmland, and farmland of local and statewide importance. And again, the idea is 2 years from now, this will no longer be an issue. We have lines on a map to help us say yes or no. There is no more questions. At least I don't believe there should be any more questions when it comes to dealing with those types of properties. And before I open it up to the board, I want to make sure that Deputy Director Thomas has the chance to correct me on anything that I may have said that was incorrect.
Not so much correction, I just have a point of clarification for my own understanding. Are you proposing for discussion today that the language be expanded for properties that are within farmland protection zone and farmland designation, and that they are going to have up to 2 years to come into compliance, and that they can get an EA permit for the outdoor grow if they complete a CEQA? Is that what I heard?
Let me try to respond to that, and I'm sorry, there was a lot of little portions to that. Number one, this will only be for applications found in the farmland protection zone. In my opinion, based off of the language that I see that was added to the section about farmland of importance, of unique farmland and prime farmland, there is no setback, there is no exclusion when it comes to farmland designation other than all properties found within the farmland protection zone. So I don't think we need to create any kind of transition for anyone outside of the farmland protection zones. They can go ahead and keep going. They might have to add vegetation screening to their process, but that would be it. There's no forced to be mixed light or forced to be indoor at this moment in time. As far as those that would be allowed early activation, what I'm offering is anybody who had an application, not CEQA, but an application that was deemed complete, which is one of the first steps after the pre-app basically, that they would be given the opportunity and may be approved for early activation, because there's still some criteria that they need to meet in order for us to approve early activation. As we've talked about in our previous resolution, there needs to be documentation. We can't just approve early activations without making sure that we've checked off the right boxes in order to feel secure about what kind of activity is being allowed on those properties.
Correct, and the Planning Commission did consider the 500-foot setback for the farmland designation, but they decided to continue the rest of that discussion for that item to Thursday's meeting.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So
and at that point, if there is a setback that comes back to us from the Planning Commission, then maybe we need to look at implementing the same transition for farmland designation as was just discussed here. But at this point, it's a moot point since nothing exists that changes the criteria they need to meet in order to be able to conduct business. Any questions or comments from the board?
So did you say we have 25 applicants who completed applications by the time in December that are in the farmland protections?
Supervisor Peister, you're breaking out really badly.
Oh, okay. Let me stop my video, see if that works. So I'm wondering, did you say there was 25 applications that meet the criteria that were deemed complete by December that are in the farmland protection zone?
No, there are 31 total projects that are within the farmland protection zone. 25 are incomplete. The rest are complete. So only 6 would meet the completeness determination.
So 25 are incomplete. Is that because they don't have CEQA, or are they incomplete for other reasons?
Both. Some are incomplete because their CEQA does not have the correct biological assessment. Some we've sent some incomplete items and we're waiting for responses. And then, you know, it's just a mismatch.
And are those, of those 25 incomplete, how many do you think are inactive now?
I would have to go through and do that analysis of which ones are inactive, because inactive is kind of one of those designations where it's sat for 4 months or more since the last incomplete item.
Well, I'm just concerned that these applicants have been working through the process for, it could be up to a couple of years, and I want to make sure that there's nothing that we have done to prevent them from being completed by the time required.
That's correct, and that's a valid point. We have engaged with a lot of active applicants numerous times. There are some applications that have 3 and 4 incomplete letters. So I don't think it's, I don't have this full slate in front of me, but to my knowledge, there's not any of them that we've just kind of sat on and not really interacted with the applicants.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
I would like to hear from the folks, public comment is what I'd like to hear from the industry right now.
Okay. All right, looks like we're looking to open up public comment and hear from the public. If you are in Zoom, please raise your hand with the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you happen to have called in via telephone, it is *9. And I am going to pick Brenna Sullivan to go first, just because I mentioned working with the Farm Bureau on our conversation about this and where we would go, and so giving her a chance to correct me if I made any misstatements and also provide her comments.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. This is Brenna Sullivan with the Lake County Farm Bureau. Supervisor Sabatier did a good job of characterizing our conversation that we had about this issue. Farm Bureau still feels that the projects within the farmland protection zones that are on farmland designation, in other words, they were previously required to grow in a greenhouse, should not be eligible for the grandfathering and sunset clause. We can appreciate some of the issues that Supervisor Sabatier mentioned. However, we just feel that the onus should be on the applicant or any consultant they hire to make sure their project complies with the ordinance. And the farmland protection zones were basically polygons drawn around broad networks of connected lands. There are some parcels on the edges and within the FPZs that do not have a prior farmland designation and that are now included for a greenhouse cultivation requirement. And these are the parcels which experienced a change in the requirements. However, we do understand that the planning department is in a bind given the number of applicants that are in various stages of the process. And so an acceptable solution to mitigate the risk of these outdoor projects is to limit the size to what's currently allowed in their early activation permits and not allow an expansion of that footprint, and then to reduce that language from 3 years down to 2 years. Thank you, and I can happy to answer any questions on that.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and go to the next hand. I see Peter, and Peter, if you can give us your full name, please.
Hi, my name is, oops, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, my name is Peter Simon. I am we have a project outside of Kelseyville. I have a few questions about the current state of the situation. I have met with Deputy Director Thomas, who's been very generous with her time, and I would like to thank her and her staff for that. The staff has been wonderful throughout this entire process. But a couple of questions that I have. Of the 25 applications, 6 have already obtained a completeness determination, I believe. Are the remaining 25 that have not, are those, for a point of clarification, are those still eligible for a continued EA for the 2 years that we're discussing? Or are they outside of the bounds of that because they do not have a completeness determination?
And I think that Deputy Director Thomas would have the best answer. I'm not aware of the number of EAs or those specifics.
It's not necessarily the numbers, and I apologize for interrupting. I'm just curious if the 25, if somebody within the 25, and to be honest with you, I'm not certain where our project lies, but if somebody was within the 25 that were not deemed complete yet, would they still be eligible for a continued EA for the 2-year interim period?
Chair, would you like me to respond to that now or wait until the end of public comment to respond to our response?
Let's go ahead and answer because there might be a lot of comments in between. And I do want to make sure we try to provide answers if we can.
I would say for that answer, it would depend on the project and the completeness and the new clarified process that the board clarified on March 16th. Primarily, did the CEQA complete? And did your CEQA determination include the projects as outlined in your EA? And does that match with your full project? Because we have to be careful about piecemealing. If we just focus on CEQA and determination on just an EA, but your bigger project is bigger and we only consider the EA and then we come back and consider the bigger project, that could be considered piecemealing.
Thank you.
It depends. And for the other comments that were presented a little bit earlier regarding the farmland designation and that they should have always been in greenhouses, it depends. The previous ordinance, before any changes were made, were left it up to an interpretation because the language said if it was not, I'm paraphrasing, if it was connected to an isolated portion or a larger system of farmland, and there was never a specific distance. So it was kind of hard to make that determination of what isolated means. So I would say that it's not necessary that every single EA that was issued under farmland designation should have categorically across the board been within a greenhouse. It was an interpretation of the ordinance matter. And I don't want to keep rehashing the same issue, but I just wanted to kind of address some of the comments on the board right now.
All right.
Thank you. And there was if I may have a second part to my question, if that's possible.
Let's make it quick.
Yeah, with the isolation issue, there was a map that was circulated a while ago that had a large black line across it that was at least presented to us by an individual indicating that that was the line where the farming limitations were. If you do have an isolated, if your property is isolated and it is not within proximity of a larger farm, then is the proposal now to still prevent that property from outdoor cannabis cultivation exclusively and no more discretion?
And I'll respond to that, that the only areas right now that you just literally cannot grow outdoor cultivation of cannabis is within those farmland protection zones. The lines that have been drawn, there is no other opportunity. It is not isolated and it is a part of a larger network. Therefore, you can only grow in mixed light or indoor.
Okay, I will follow up afterwards on some clarification on it. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next, I see we have Crystal Kesey.
Hi, Crystal Kesey, Golden State Herb. I have a project that is affected by this issue. I'm going to be not so nice today. The first thing is that this is a bait and switch, plain and simple. We've been talking about 3-year sunset. I'm not in the farmland protection zone. I'm in the buffer zone outside of the farmland protection zone. And my project has been in the pipeline for over 2 years. Now, by forcing us into greenhouses, you are forcing us to double the taxes and increase the project costs by 5 times. So a $2.5 million project overnight by your vote becomes a $10 million project cost, $7.5 million more. There's got to be some kind of concessions or negotiations with the industry for these actions, because you're protecting other ag industries who are committing pesticide drift issues, and you're putting the burden of the solution on the victims of the drift, which are the cannabis growers who are subject to pesticide tests in parts per billion. This, again, I'm sorry I'm so upset, but this is a bait and switch. There was no information in the agenda about these new suggested changes. This is the first we've heard of this. Now we're going from 3 years to 2 years for a sunset, and then limited to a early activation footprint, even though in my case, we are calendared for a planning commission hearing on April 22nd. We are not only deemed complete, our CEQA has also been done, and it's been done since July of last summer. So I'm one of the 6 people who are caught, as Supervisor Sabatier said, caught in this web of changes. And for those of us who are caught in this web, it simply is a bait and switch. Is there anything that you can do to help us to go from an idea that I have to spend $2 million on a project to that I'm going to have to spend $10 million on a project is unconscionable. And I don't feel like our needs are being represented whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Let's go to Leanne Campodonico. Apologize if I didn't pronounce that last name correctly.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please state your name.
Leanne Campodonico. I live on Soda Bay Road. I'm in Tina Scott's district. I am literally on the other side of the fence from the previous speaker. We found out about a project that is asking for an increase of acreage over their 2020 early activation project. I'm not sure what the footprint was, but it's the project is requesting a variance to be able to grow outdoors instead of indoors on 10 acres. So we don't know where that sits in terms of this current proposed compromise with the farmland protection zone restrictions. There are problems being a neighbor. I am literally over the fence. My VPN is bordering one of these, I guess, 6 projects. We live downwind, a prevailing downwind from the project. If it increases, if they start out with an acre and they increase 10 times, it's going to be 10 times the odor that we get. They use an easement road, a very narrow easement road to access Soda Bay Road without an encroachment. There's a lot of traffic, a lot of dust. So it has a big impact on us. We are an organic farm. We too worry about pesticide drift. And we are, doing what we can to mitigate drift coming elsewhere. But we are wanting to maintain this area as an agricultural area in the Big Valley in the traditional sense. So we feel that we were surprised with the news that there would be this huge project going in next doors, possibly. So we kind of, as I say, we're on the opposite side of the fence. We too feel a little bit surprised by the developments. And I would like to request that, as the Farm Bureau would like to see happen, that the early activation projects do not increase their footprint, and certainly not by going from 1 to 10 acres. That is a huge increase if they get that for 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, let's go ahead and unmute Sarah Bodner.
Good afternoon. This is Sarah Bodner with Kindness Farms in Lakeport. Supervisors, thank you for bringing forward the proposed amendments, we'd like to express our appreciation first and foremost for creating this crucial bridge for applicants. And I want to restate how important this is for the farms that you're considering and the many, many employees that we support in their families. And we had several employees write in at the Planning Commission meeting and speak, and I'm just going to summarize their sentiment, which is that creating this bridge is the difference between these businesses staying afloat and these jobs being kept. And we'd like that bridge to be as large as possible, because that's what's really at stake here. So I want to comment on a few items that have been discussed today. First, we're talking about applicants in good standing, people who are in the process, who are doing their best. Our application was deemed complete by December 15th, and we're one of the fortunate few that met that deadline. But that arbitrary deadline does leave out a lot of farms that have been operating in good faith that are in the process, and we'd like to see others within the farmland protection zone and other impacted zones also be included like the Planning Commission recommended. So one possible thing you could consider is if they had submitted their use permit application by December 15th, would be another way to include more folks. As for allowing us to activate the full extent of our conditional use permit, this would bring alignment on so many levels, and we would definitely advocate for those farms who had applications deemed complete to be able to activate to the full footprint of their conditional use permit, not just the early activation footprint. The 2 years is a bit alarming. This proposal from the beginning has been 3 years to acknowledge the magnitude of what this transition involves and the number of permits, the amount of materials, construction, and time that would go into this. 2 years done from 3 is a massive change. And what I would offer is that we have been in this process for 2 years and we still do not have use permits. So in 2 years from now, are we going to be back in the same position we're in now, having this conversation all over again because we simply didn't give applicants enough time to come into compliance with these new requirements that have been overlaid over existing operations? So I would ask you to consider that, and are we limiting the applicants in good standing unnecessarily here? Lastly, there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of differing interpretation of the different standards over time. And what our request is that the Board of Supervisors provide very clear direction to the Community Development Department as to how to process the currently pending applications that are literally sitting on desks right now. We are only a week or two away from the planting window, and our projects are hanging in the balance. And the staff needs clear direction from the board to understand how to process them so that we don't miss the planting window, that we can keep our teams employed, and that we can put plants in the ground this year. And I just want to underline the gravity of that for an agricultural industry and how important it is that the board and the staff and the applicants all have a common shared understanding so that we can continue operating in good faith and keep growing this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next hand, we have phone 0217. I believe you're going to need to press *6 in order to unmute.
Okay. My name is Steve Hedrick, Lake County Commissioner. I agree with Brenna, so I'm not going to repeat what she said. One thing that was clear at the Planning Commission meeting that I don't think anyone listened to apparently was just because rules were in place 2 years ago doesn't mean they have to stay in place forever. So if the rules change, the rules change. Now I know that may make some people nervous, but that's what you said. The county doesn't have to keep all the rules in place until someone makes it through and then change the rules. I'm also concerned with, apparently they have to be in good standing with the state and the county. Who makes sure that they're in good standing with the state? And who makes sure that they're in good standing with the county? Is that community development? Or I've been told that community development has told people that they're not involved with state compliance. That's up to the state to tell them. That's what I heard. That's it.
Thank you very much. Just want to comment on that I know that Community Development is in constant communication with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. They share their information back and forth. So I'm sure that they are aware of who is in compliance and who is not, and if they're not aware, that they have easy access to that information through that relationship that has been fostered with CDFA. Let's go ahead and open up for Julia Jacobson.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. This is Julia Jacobson from Astor Farms. We were the second licensed cannabis cultivators in the county and one of the longest operators. I just wanted to reiterate some of Crystal Kesey and Sarah Bodner's points, specifically regarding cannabis as an agricultural product that is held to standards that make it actually the purest and cleanest agricultural product cultivated today. And I just want to reiterate this amidst comments about concerns of cannabis crops affecting other crops, and just reiterate that this industry is truly taking environmental precautions and being held at a regulatory level to environmental precautions that are unlike other industries. And I just want to make sure that is on the record today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have one more hand here. And Peter, let's go ahead and take you up again.
Peter, I've sent you an unmute request. You should be able to unmute now.
I should be unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. I left my hand up, but I would just like to echo the comments of Crystal and some of the other speakers. The one thing that I would urge the board to do is to also continue to leave the discretion of the isolated areas available. I know exercising discretion is always a difficult thing to do, but to try to group all of these projects into the same bucket is oftentimes problematic. If there are legitimate concerns about transference to other crops, they can be handled on a case-by-case basis. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And then let's go to Will Weiss.
Will, it looks like you're unmuted now. Will you please confirm your first and last name?
Sure, I apologize. My name is Will Weiss. I'm with Bella Vista Farming Company, and my family owns one of the vineyards near where Ms. Campodonico spoke of just a few moments ago on Soda Bay Road. And while I don't want to waste anyone's time being one of the last commenters, I just wanted to say that, it seems to me that that prevailing conventional agriculture, that being walnuts, pears, and wine grapes in Lake County, I know of very little philosophical aversion to the growing of cannabis, and I personally harbor no such views, but I am concerned and am tuning in for this purpose because I believe that if the ordinance as drafted and as amended, a process which took well over a year and is still ongoing, if the ordinance as drafted and amended is not honored, I worry that there is a significant risk of a litigious outpouring in Lake County over matters related to spray drift and other complications that occur in agriculture when properties neighbor one another. I can certainly appreciate the level of scrutiny and regulation that is applied to cannabis farmers in this county and otherwise, but I think we would only be making the problem worse, not better, if we were to adjust these rules too quickly or without proper consideration for the way that the ordinance was drafted to date. So I will cut short at that point. Thank you very much for your time, and to the supervisors for making this time and space available for comment.
Thank you. Next, we have Lance.
Hello there, Lance Williams. I wanted to say thank you, everyone, for discussing this and taking the time. At the Planning Commission, one thing that did come up is that everyone seemed to agree that we did not want the deadline to be based on CEQA. So this is why this was brought back to you guys, that maybe more people could be included besides the 6. I don't want to get into too many other things, but I do believe that Brenna and Steve have some really good valid points, and we do need to deal with this because no one could figure out what was an isolated area. And so this has to be dealt with no matter what. You can't just put it to the side, and people have to start growing. So today will be the day to make some choices. I also believe, hearing, there can be some discretion in isolated areas. I think that there are a number of people who do have letters currently from the Ag Department, so there was some decisions that were currently made already by Steve. But other than that, I think the agreement was that those were the areas, those farmland protection zones were done, and anything else is isolated. So that kind of, fixes the problem right there. And this was something, again, there was a problem that, we had to protect some of the farms that were there. People were not supposed to be growing in certain locations as it was. So in other words, whether it was a fine farmland lot itself, but this really kind of is helping things out. I won't comment really too much on whether it's 3 or 2 years. That's going to be up to your discretion, but you've heard what the ag community wants. And I still don't think it would be perfect here, as Crystal was saying. I don't have an answer yet for that, so maybe you guys can go think about that or take a break and think about a couple things before making this important decision. But thank you again for looking at this. And again, I believe that we need to include more people than 6. So if there is a way to do that. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And those are all the hands that I see for the Zoom room. Want to make sure and check in with those in attendance with us here in the chamber. Any public comment? Okay, it looks like a few more hands just popped up here. Let's go ahead and start with Jennifer Smith.
Jennifer Smith, if you're talking, I did see a little bit of activity on your mic when you unmuted, but I'm not seeing anything now. You might have a hardware mute on your side, maybe? Still not hearing you.
Okay, let's go ahead and put Jennifer on pause. And Jake, if it's possible for you to work with her and maybe provide the phone number so she can call in, if that's a better way. And let's go ahead and go with Christina Torres.
Oh, I did unmute.
And we can hear you.
Great. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you, Board of Supervisors, for taking the time to address this very important and timely issue. We do appreciate it. My name is Christina Torres. I'm with Stella Green Farms in Lakeport. And we are actually in that transition. We are caught in the web. I just wanted to thank you for your time and comment on the language of grandfathering in. I would like to see farms being able to grow, and grandfathering in language would be much appreciated, and the expansion to include more farms and continue growing in good faith and in good compliance with the community would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Jake, have we resolved Jennifer Smith's technical issue?
Yeah, she did say she was going to call in. And I'm not seeing any number dropping.
About the greenhouse thing, you know, because what if they
And just real quick, wanted to add, I know some people are throwing out the term grandfather clause, and I think we need to be wary of using those specific terms because they might mean something different to others. And so let me just, part of the discussion that was brought to the Planning Commission and that was brought back to us is that those that have a use permit that have already been approved through the Planning Commission, those get to continue with what they were approved through their use permit process. If they wish to update or change their use permit, then at that point they would have to meet and be in compliance with the new rules if they choose to update their project. Those who are caught in this web is really what we're discussing. And then those that haven't, at least according to the definition both from the Planning Commission and the one that I'm offering, those who have not even had a complete application, not talking CEQA, just the actual application itself, the first submission to the planning department, at this point in time, they would have to change their project to meet the new compliance. And at this moment in time, both the Planning Commission and myself, we could change that, are only speaking about those with, at the very least, a complete application provided to the Planning Department, and then with the potential of asking for more to be completed, such as the CEQA document that the Planning Commission brought back to us. I see that Jennifer Smith is back on. Are we able to get her microphone going? And if it doesn't work this time, yeah, let's hope it works.
This is Jennifer. Can you hear me?
Perfect. We can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, this is very frustrating for everybody. It's the industry is really in a, what do you call that, between a rock and a hard place. We're getting even more changes thrown at us today, yet we can't tolerate many more delays if you want to have a sustainable season from us. Farmers having a sustainable season is what pays the taxes. And while we appreciate being here and we consider that our taxes are very valuable, many people are not going to be able to plant. Applicants have invested in Lake County. They've invested in their projects. They've brought jobs to the county. And now, after operating for some people 2 years, the rug is being pulled out from under them. I'm going to assert again that we are creating a problem where there is none. We're creating policy based upon anecdotal comments and hearsay. There is documented studies out there to refute all of these accusations. Currently, there's been some discretion allowed. I think that we should continue with some discretion. As we listen to speakers, we're hearing about projects that have been in the pipeline for 2 years, some that have been in the pipeline for a year. I really think these projects need to be evaluated, and anybody that has submitted prior to December 15th should be given some consideration. Why weren't they deemed complete? Have they been abandoned like Takara says? And if those have been abandoned, then that's on the applicant, and that's their own fault. But I do believe there are plenty more than 5 or 6 that have been in the pipeline and working diligently towards their licensing, and they're really getting the shaft here. And I think there's got to be some, and I know it's more work, but there's got to be a case-by-case evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to kind of reiterate and clarify, at this moment in time, there is no transition capability. Farmland Protection Zone has stated that there is no allowed outdoor cultivation at all in those zones and within its buffer. And this is a conversation to attempt to be fair to those that have been caught within the application process. And so the conversation is about looking at a transition versus what we currently have in place, which is zero transition. So want to make sure that we recognize that what the conversation is. And I see that Director De Leon has chimed on, and want to make sure he gets a chance to speak.
Thank you, Chair Sabatier. I think the comments from the last speaker are timely for what I'd like to say, and that is, you know, I'm hearing we're changing the rules, things of that nature, and I think it's important to kind of look at the big picture here. This ordinance, from the very beginning, precluded commercial cannabis cultivation on farmland of local importance. It was clear that you could not grow outdoors on farmland of local importance, but it gave a caveat, and that caveat was a little peculiar. It was a little difficult to understand, and it was frankly a little ambiguous. And so when I came on board about a year ago, I made a big effort to work with Steve Hajic and the Ag Commissioner and Brenna Sullivan to try to establish an understanding between those user groups and those folks. What are considered farmland of local importance where they meet the definition of, and I'm just going to read directly from the ordinance. It says outdoor cultivation may be allowed outside a greenhouse if the prime farmland of statewide importance, unique farmland, and farmland of local importance are isolated areas that are not connected to a large system of such lands. We looked case by case at applications to try to determine if the land met that definition. What the board did with and I appreciate the concern that what happens when I'm no longer making that decision, or Steve Hajic's no longer making that decision, and what happens is if that changes. And so to try to gain some consistency, with your help, Chair Sabatier, you created that committee with all the user groups represented, and you came up with this farmland protection zones, which defined what I just read. And you drew a box around areas of farmland of local importance that were connected to larger groups, and we created those exclusion zones. And what those zones are areas where you cannot grow outdoors based on the current ordinance. And what that effort was trying to do was to create something that was consistent and that everyone could look at and see and say, okay, I have to grow indoors. Obviously, a lot of pushback and a lot of concern about, well, what about me? I've had my application in for some time now. I was given an early activation permit and all those kinds of things. And this whole effort that we've been trying to do since that map was adopted is to try to address the folks who were already in the hopper and try to equitably come to some conclusion here. But the bottom line is if you're inside that, based on the original ordinance, you can't grow outdoors. Why this CDD took in applications that proposed outdoor cultivation on farmland of local importance, I don't know. I can't speak to applications that were submitted 2-3 years ago and they're still in the hopper. If they didn't meet the ordinance, we should have never taken them in. I can't speak to projects that we've issued early activation permits that were on these lands and should have never been given early activations. This whole effort is to try to bring all that into some equitable and fair conclusion. But the bottom line and the direction that I'm trying to get and the direction that CDD is trying to go is we have an ordinance that specifically precludes outdoor cultivation in certain areas. And that's all we're trying to do is to to know what the rules are, accept what the rules are, and apply the rules fairly. And you know, I don't think everyone's going to be happy here. I think I think we need to live by what the ordinance says. And if we're going to give folks a period of time to come into compliance with the ordinance, then that's fine. Tell us what that's going to be, and we're going to make sure that they get brought into compliance. There's been a lot of talk about, you know, my project was complete, my project wasn't complete. There were an awful lot of applications that were submitted and accepted here at CDD that were not complete, and wanted to get in on the rush, and I appreciate that, but there's things that we've got to do and in the processing of these permits, and we're going to continue to do that, and that's what you charge us to do. So I like the map. I apologize, and I appreciate the frustration of the folks that are kind of caught in limbo here. But when you submitted your application, if you'd read the ordinance, you'd have seen that if you were on farmland of local importance, you couldn't grow outdoors. And we're just trying to enforce that. And if that's going to change, or we want to change that, then that's going to need to be a topic of another discussion, and obviously a change in the ordinance. But for right now, that's what we're trying to live by, and we're trying to be consistent. And I apologize for the inconsistency that this department has had prior to me and Takara getting here, and we're trying to work our way through that. So I think wanted to share some perspective of what it's like up here on the third floor and the things that we're dealing with. And I understand the time frame. I understand people want to get planting. I get it. I know. And I know the importance of the industry and the tax revenue that y'all generate. And we're under enormous pressure up here to try to get this stuff done. And I just felt it was important to share a perspective from the third floor. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Director De Leon. I did not officially close public comment. I see one hand up, so let's go ahead and finish that with Jennifer Smith. And since you've already had your 3 minutes, if you can try to keep it succinct, please.
Absolutely, thank you. I just want to acknowledge Mr. De Leon's comments, and that Dr. De Leon's comments, and that I don't think anybody in the industry is questioning projects that were erroneously planned for prime farmland or FPZ. They took a risk in submitting and not educating themselves, or their consultants submitted projects that shouldn't have been there. I think the frustration comes from people that are on adjacent parcels that are now subject to new rules. So I just want to make sure that we're aligned and we agree. If you didn't do your due diligence on your parcel, you have to take ownership for that. But I think the concern comes from those adjacent parcels, and hopefully we can find some way for some middle ground for those affected in that manner. Thanks.
Thank you. And another hand popped up, Crystal Kesey. Again, since you've already had your 3 minutes, if you can try and be succinct.
Hi, yes, thank you for letting me speak again. I just wanted to address Director De Leon's words, where the Red Hills area was not designated as a farmland of local importance until December 8th, 2020. So people who are affected by that new farmland protection zone are the ones that are having the issue, because we've been in the pipeline for 2 years in complete compliance with the ordinance. And while I agree, just like Jennifer Smith said, that people who tried to early activate in areas that were clear from the beginning, to have a new farmland zone created in December of 2020 is the issue that most of us are pushing back on. One compromise thing that I could see that would work is that instead of requiring full-blown greenhouses in these buffer zones around farmland protection, not within the farmland protection zone, but around the farmland protection zones, is to allow a Santa Barbara style hoop house greenhouse situation, which is less cost intensive and will still provide the same kind of protections for both industries that are kind of at odds with each other. But what I'd like to suggest is that we should have had this map that Supervisor Leanne talked about. There was very little input from the actual stakeholders who are affected by the map. And what should have happened is a summit where the parties that have issues with each other could sit down and actually strike a reasonable compromise that doesn't place the entire burden of the solution on the cannabis industry. Thank you.
Thank you. And while you were continuing on your comment, I did open up the farmland designation map, and almost the entirety of the Red Hills is unique farmland. Some portions are prime farmland, some portions are farmland of importance, and throughout in the middle there's also a lot of grazing land. And there was no farmland protection zone prior to that. It was all based on these designations, which is exactly where it led to that confusion, and unfortunately made some changes that do have impacts on people. And that is our discussion here, is how to deal with that and how to move forward with that. Let me just see real quick. Okay, no hands here in the courthouse and no more hands on the Zoom. Let's bring it back to the board for discussion. Do you mind if I share my screen to show you the what I was offering, or do you not want me to share my screen? Okay, so let me. You see all of that? Let's see if we can make it bigger. Is that perfect? Okay. So this is what I was offering. The original offer is basically the same thing as the top, except it's 3 years, and then application deemed complete no later than December 15th, and then that your CEQA has been completed as well. If we do stick with the original format, I would suggest providing some California government code of what deemed complete means for both application and CEQA, rather than allowing that to be just kind of open-ended to interpretation of what that specifically means. But then again, right in front of you, you have what I am offering that we look at. I tried my best. I know that there's a lot of different types of applications that we are looking at, and the more I started individually seeing the separate situations for each one, it got very complicated. So I did my best to offer something that would be simple to follow, both from the applicant perspective as well as from the staff perspective. Let me know if you want me to stop sharing, and also looking for anybody to make a comment or ask questions.
I do have a comment and a question. First, I'd like to thank Director DeLeon for that explanation of our ordinance. I think it made it clear. But there was also a question about, footprints increasing, but according to this, they wouldn't be allowed to do that, correct? Because I know one of the speakers was concerned about their neighbor increasing their footprint.
So on a case-by-case basis, I don't know where they are and asking to be increased. Have they been deemed complete for the increase? Have they not been deemed complete? Have they already done early activation through there? Because what I'm offering here in front of you is, if you've early activated, then you can continue for up to 2 years with that exact same footprint of early activation. Or if you're pretty much ready to go to Planning Commission, rather than giving you a use permit that's non-conforming, to provide you with an early activation of what your use permit allows you. So that last concept would definitely allow you to increase your footprint.
But that wouldn't, I know we talked about the grandfathering in, But they would have 2 years then to make sure that was all indoors?
Either of those situations, you would have a maximum of 2 years and no more. And due to the fact that now it's a map, it would seem that it is close to impossible that anyone else would be led astray in thinking they can do an outdoor cultivation in the farmland protection zone. So once we reach that 2-year transition period, then we should never have to deal with another type of application in that scenario.
But they would need to get building permits, correct, to be able to put those buildings up to be able to grow inside?
Correct.
That would be my concern, and I would guess I would need to go back to Scott De Leon. Is 2 years enough time to be able to get those permits and get those buildings put up?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer because there's so many variables. If everything was complete and if they had their permits, then yes, I would think we could get building permits done in that period of time. One of the things about early activation, and man, we really muddy the water when we start talking about early activation versus use permits. One of the things with early activation is you aren't building anything, you aren't constructing anything. There's no building permits, there's no grading permits required, and so to get a building permit, you've got to have a use permit. So that kind of presumes then that the applicant has got everything done. We've gone through CEQA. The use permit is ready to go, and then absolutely we could get building permits for structures done in that time.
Thank you.
And just to kind of reiterate a point that I made earlier, with some of the new actions that are allowed for CEQA processes, such as doing your CEQA analysis by hiring your own consultant, or some of the contracts that we've signed to have our CEQAs reviewed by agencies outside of our staff for CDD, there's certain processes that have been made more efficient. That makes me believe that it's possible in the 2 years. But I do agree with Director De Leon that it all depends on the complexity of the project, how many times it has to go back and forth between staff and applicant to finalize the documentation. There's a lot of moving parts to this. And again, some of what I'm showing you is through the art of compromise with some of the discussions of those who are dealing with cannabis and those who are dealing with traditional agriculture.
Chair Sabatier, on D2 or DII, does, and you'll have to forgive me, and this chapter 21, the article there, the early activation permit there's got to be some level of CEQA has been completed. Is that addressed in chapter 21?
So we just passed a resolution of chapter 21, article 27.13 AT21C, which C is just early activation permits. And the resolution we passed helps to provide a little extra language on what that area, or what is required in order to achieve early activation. So in my assumption, and Ms. Grant would be the one to tell me, that all of those things need to be in compliance and to make them eligible, which is why I said in D2, early activation permits may be approved, because I don't want to force the hand of CDD when documentation is not there to provide the okay to go ahead and move forward.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask Ms. Grant a question. The language that is being proposed here is enough of a change that it would require a new first reading, correct?
Well, sir, I think that in this case, it should be put over for a week just to give people a chance to absorb this and look at it against the existing ordinance with regard to farmland protection as well as cannabis cultivation, and just to ensure that there are no unintended consequences or unplanned for inconsistencies, and to make sure that all loose ends are tied up, because to do this, I'm sure you want it to be as crystal clear as possible so that it answers questions and doesn't create any new ones.
Thank you very much. So I'm looking for guidance from the board on whether we want to move forward with the original proposal, which is 3 years and deemed complete, providing that CEQA has been completed. Again, should be based on state law, state government code section as to what that actually means, deemed complete for CEQA. Or if you would prefer something more along the lines of what is offered, or something in between, that way there can be something that can be put together to come back to us in the following week.
I have a question. I'm going to turn my video off. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I don't have a lot of service right now.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So what you're offering, would that expand the applicants beyond just the 6 that meet the criteria of what CDD is proposing?
I can't say for a fact because there's probably the wide spectrum from those who have not completed their original application, or their original application has not been deemed complete, to some who may have started CEQA. I think the 5 or 6 that were spoken of, they have completed their CEQA, and I will let Deputy Director Thomas correct me on that.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I heard half of it.
Oh, and so I'm wondering if Supervisor Sabatier's suggestions would expand the eligible applicants beyond the 6 that your recommendations do.
I'm looking at the language now. I think it just depends on the level of the completeness of the projects. As we get into the details of some of them, we see that it's complete on paper, but then if you start reading the actual documentation, like it'll have all the documents requested, so that technically meets the completeness determination. But then if you get into it, and a good example I keep picking on is the biological, it will say that the survey wasn't completed in floristic season. So technically that means it's incomplete. So I can't give you a straight answer right now because it really is a case-by-case basis as we dig into the details of these projects.
And how many of these applicants grew last year in EA?
Out of the 160 applications that we've received over the last couple of years, there are 69 requests for EAs. And I'll have to go digging through the details of the annual inspection, but approximately 80% of those grew.
Okay, so the applicants here that we're talking about, the 25 that wouldn't be eligible under the new requirements, how many of those were able to grow last year in EA?
I need to look at the details. I know for total, out of the total 31, and then those 6 that are complete, a good deal of those grew last year out of that 6. But out of the 25, I need to look into the details.
Okay. I'm just really, I'm not comfortable with having so many applicants coming through the process and then not being eligible to at least grow through this transition. That's where I'm at.
Okay. Any further comments from other board members?
I think I'm the same with Jessica's concerns when we talk about the numbers. Giving them the opportunity for the transition, I think is very important. And ultimately, this is constantly changing. I know that we're going to talk about that as solid as we can be, but we know every decision we make, there's going to be something that someone ain't happy with. So we're never going to get it perfect, but I think moving forward, I agree with the 3 years, not the 2 years, especially when you were talking about the date Supervisor Sabatier being actually April 2022. That's, less than a year away now, so, I just think that including as many of these as possible we could do as we move through the process, but giving them that transition opportunity is very important.
I apologize for that 2022. I don't know where
Okay.
my mind was. That should say 2023, so let me
I
just
was
fix
like,
that
that's
real quick.
less than a year, so I just wanted to
Sorry
make sure.
about that. That's a very important correction. So I'm hearing, is it possible to maybe kind of, since this is such a small thing, and I'm gonna, how am I gonna do this? I want to be able to see everybody. Hold on one sec. Well, Supervisor Scott, I can't see you, so if you could just speak up, please don't feel like you're interrupting. I'm wondering who wants to see 2 years or 3 years? That way it helps to formulate what will come back to us. So I know you spoke for the 3 years.
I'm concerned about the timing, if 2 years is enough time.
Okay, so you're thinking 3 years?
Yes.
2? Okay, and maybe that's something that we can continue negotiating a little bit later. What do you think needs to be deemed complete? Just the application itself being submitted, hold on, let me start over. What point should we allow people within the transition? Just those who have submitted an application, but they're not complete? An application and their application is complete? An application that also has CEQA or that has begun, or an application that also has CEQA that has been completed? What is your step of what you feel should allow people to be offered a transition? My personal opinion is your application has been deemed complete.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
But there's only 6 of those, right, out of the 30?
No, from what I understand, and Deputy Director Thomas, please correct me, that the applications that have been deemed complete and CEQA has also gone through its process and deemed complete?
I have a spreadsheet open now. Let's break it down for the ones in farmland protection zone. So the farmland protection zone, we have, oh goodness, that's not right. Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly. I got a couple of filters on my spreadsheet. So farmland designation, there are there are 41 projects that are deemed farmland designation. Of those 41,
Are we talking farmland protection zone or designation?
I'm starting farmland designation. So unique prime, I'm starting with that, and then I'll move on to farmland protection zone. So we got 41 projects that are deemed farmland designation. Of that 41, it looks like we actually have 20 with CEQA that's complete. So I misspoke earlier. And now for the farmland protection zone, we have there's 1, 2 that were deemed complete with CEQA before December 15th.
And how many have applications that have been deemed complete, not CEQA, but the application itself?
The application deemed complete?
Yes.
Yeah. $34. looks like the majority of them have been deemed complete. There are like 1, 2, 3, 4 deemed incomplete.
So out of the 25 that are left over in the farmland protection zone, 21 would be able to transition if it was just based on application being deemed complete.
Correct.
Okay, appreciate that information.
And so I'm guessing that that would also be people that are in good standing and paid taxes last year as well. But I don't think that we should exclude applicants that grew last year and paid taxes.
Not all of these projects that are farmland protection zone came in last year. So we have some from 2021, 2020, 2019, and 2018.
And as you see in item number 2, D2, it says all applicable taxes, meaning if you had a bill to pay, you need to have paid your taxes and not be in default. But if you didn't have a bill to pay because you didn't grow, then at that point, there's no applicable taxes that would be required of you.
Right, but not paying your taxes should make you eligible, I believe.
Yeah, and that's what it says. Early activation permits may be approved if all applicable taxes are paid in full.
Right.
And the applicant has not been in violation of any applicable state and local laws. That way, if you had a violation, sorry, but that's a strike. And then also the applicant has made reasonable effort in the use permit process to provide all necessary information. Again, meaning as Deputy Director Thomas had mentioned earlier, that it's not a quote unquote abandoned project or abandoned application where it's been 4 months where we've requested something to help deem it complete or move it forward, and that has not been provided to us. And
okay,
I think
I'm good with 3 years, but if we're going to look at this for next week, if we look at this again, can we see some numbers so we can have them in front of us?
Okay. And then, so the last part, early activation. Do we want to make a difference between do only the footprint if you were early activated before of what you can do? Do we want to limit what early activation for that look like? Do we want to give use permits? Because that is definitely a conversation. Do we want a non-conforming use permit where they have a condition of approval that you must meet the compliance of the law within 3 years, if that's what we go with, or do we only do early activation in order to only give use permits that are conforming with the law?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if you're willing, at some point, I do have a couple of comments that may be helpful.
I think we could use all the help we can get.
I would be very careful in terms of adjusting early activation permits because again, they are simply temporary in nature. I think your board's made it very clear that you want to move toward an adjustment of those for minor use permits so that people who are applying have the benefit of the certainty of an actual use permit as opposed to a temporary permit, which by its nature is somewhat transitory. I would also be very careful in terms of what you do with a footprint because of CEQA requirements, and your board does not have the authority to circumvent any required CEQA analysis, and I'm sure that's not your intention. The other thing I would ask is it says that an applicant may be provided a 3-year transition period. What it doesn't say is what happens if the applicant fails to completely transition within that 3 years, or indeed how you define completely transition.
Okay, I appreciate those comments. So just checking in with the board, do you want to provide more details to CDD to bring something back to us, or leave it with the comments that have been made? I think there's been provided some good detail of what we of what the cutoff is for applicants to be able to be involved in the transition to meet the new law of farmland protection zones. We've talked about the number of years. We've talked about the, again, deemed complete for applications. Do we want to leave the rest to go back to CDD and come back with their proposal for the next time that they come back to us with this? Or would you rather kind of keep going down the line?
I'm fine with CDD coming back with some proposals.
Okay. Okay. I see two heads nodding.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
All right. So at this point, we'll just leave it as is, and with the comments made thus far for the direction to staff, and see if we can get this back on our agenda. And we'll see if we can get that back as soon as possible, and that'll be up to staff time and capacity. Any further comments before we move on? Other than I need to stop sharing. I can see everybody now. Okay, well, I do appreciate the conversation. I think that we had a tough conversation, just like the Planning Commission had a tough conversation. We are dealing with applicants who have aspirations to conduct business and to become farmers here in our communities. These are not simple changes. I still stand by the changes we had to make in order to help clarify what occurred on prime farmland and our traditional farmlands. And I look forward to what the proposal will be to come back and rediscuss this further. Thank you to all the public comments as well. Definitely understand that there are some impacts. And if there's no further comments from board members, then this was our final item to take up today. I will ask my vice chair, was there any action in our closed session today?
No, there was no action to be
Okay.
taken.
Wanted to make sure I remembered that we wanted to report out of closed session today. So thank you everybody for joining us for our meeting, and we'll see you next week.